It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. 1 second, I was sitting there at the table, smiling politely, trying to believe the warmth in my son's eyes and the sweetness in my daughter-in-law's tone. The next, I felt the sting of cold liquid running down my face, the sharp clatter of a martini glass shattering against the floor. For a moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears and the rush of my own heartbeat. The humiliation was instant, burning through me more than the alcohol dripping from my hair. That was the moment everything cracked open. But let me rewind. It hadn't always been like this. Not long before, I had actually believed life had taken a turn for the better. Against all odds, I won the lottery. The numbers lined up, and with them came the sudden shock of freedom and the promise of security I'd never thought possible. And almost overnight, my family shifted. My son, who had always kept his distance, suddenly couldn't get enough of me. He smiled, he called, he asked about my day as if my life truly mattered. My daughter-in-law, who usually treated me with polite indifference, became strangely attentive, almost charming. For a while, I wanted to believe in it. I wanted to believe love had returned. But underneath their kindness, small cracks were forming, little manipulations, subtle hints, constant talk about money cloaked as concern. I told myself I was imagining things. That joy makes us suspicious sometimes. Then came the envelope, heavy, unassuming, slid across the table with too much silence. Inside it, one number screamed louder than anything I had ever seen, 84,700. Debt. Their debt. And now it was supposed to be mine. I sat frozen, my fingers trembling around the paper, my mind reeling. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with words, it hits like a glass across the face. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just a mother or a convenient wallet. I was a target, and that was only the beginning. For most of my life, I lived quietly, carefully, like someone balancing on a thin rope stretched over years of bills and responsibilities. I worked as a teacher, steady, dependable, but never glamorous. My days were measured in lesson plans and modest paychecks. I learned how to stretch $1, how to make soup last for 3 days, how to patch clothes instead of buying new ones. Security always felt just out of reach, like something meant for other people. Still, I told myself I was content. My joy came from small things, the smile of a student who finally understood a lesson, the calm of sitting on the porch in the evening with a cup of tea. Yet underneath, there was always a longing, a quiet ache for more. Not extravagance, but freedom. The freedom to travel, to breathe without worry, to know that if the car broke down or the roof leaked, I wouldn't lose sleep wondering how to pay for it. Then came the lottery. I almost couldn't believe it when the numbers lined up. Suddenly, the weight I had carried for decades lifted. For the first time, I felt the world open up to me. I imagined visiting places I had only read about, maybe Paris in the spring, or standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I made plans cautiously, determined not to squander this blessing. But what surprised me most wasn't the money, it was the people. My son started calling more often, asking about my day with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. My daughter-in-law invited me into conversations, smiled at me like we were suddenly close. For a while, I let myself believe it was real, that maybe this win wasn't just about money, but about family, too. And yet, somewhere deep down, a shadow stirred. Something told me not everything was as it seemed. The dinner looked flawless, almost too flawless. The table was dressed in crisp white linen, polished silver, and crystal glasses that caught the candlelight in delicate sparkles. A centerpiece of roses and lilies sat proudly in the middle, their fragrance filling the room in waves that felt more staged than natural. Plates arrived with dishes I had never tasted before: seared scallops with lemon butter, a roast glazed to perfection, wine poured from bottles whose labels looked expensive enough to make me flinch. It was the kind of spread you'd expect at a high-end restaurant, not at a family table. On the surface, it was all generosity. My daughter-in-law floated around the room, every move deliberate, every smile a little too polished, like she was auditioning for the role of perfect hostess. My son, usually reserved, leaned in with practiced warmth, his laughter louder and more frequent than I had ever heard it. And yet, underneath the glitter of it all, I felt an odd chill. Their kindness had a rhythm, a rehearsed quality, as if lines had been memorized and cues silently followed. I kept telling myself I should enjoy it. After all, hadn't I dreamed of a moment like this family gathered around me, celebrating not just my win, but perhaps our bond? Still, something gnawed at me. Every toast seemed to circle back to me, but not in a way that made me feel loved, more like I was being placed on a pedestal, observed, managed. Even the flowers, beautiful as they were, felt like props in a play rather than a gift of affection. I tried to push away the unease, sip my wine, and breathe in the illusion of belonging. But the longer I sat there, the stronger the feeling grew that this wasn't truly about me. It wasn't about celebrating my good fortune. It was about positioning me, centering me on their stage for a reason I hadn't yet seen. And then I knew. This was not a dinner of gratitude or family closeness. It was a performance, carefully crafted, leading me towards something else, something I wasn't going to like. The laughter around the table had begun to fade, like a song that suddenly lost its melody. One moment the air was filled with clinking glasses and forced cheer. The next, it grew heavy, as though everyone knew the performance was over. I noticed it in the way my son's smile stiffened, in the way my daughter-in-law's voice softened into something rehearsed and deliberate. And then, as if on cue, an envelope appeared. It was placed in front of me with a kind of reverence, but the weight of it was suffocating before I even touched it. My fingers hesitated, trembling slightly as I slid the flap open. Inside was a stack of papers, neat, cold, clinical. My eyes scanned the numbers, and there it was. 84,700. The figure glared at me from the page, each digit sharper than the last, cutting into me like glass. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought I must be reading it wrong. It couldn't be real, but it was. It wasn't just numbers, it was debt. Their debt. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This dinner, the flowers, the polished charm, it had never been about celebrating me. It had been about cornering me. The words they wrapped around it were dressed in sweetness, but I could feel the steel beneath. Family helping family. We're in this together. It wasn't spoken outright, but the meaning was clear. I had won the lottery. And now, it was my responsibility to rescue them. The celebration had been nothing more than a stage, a performance designed to soften me before the blow. I wanted to shout, to demand how love could turn so quickly into leverage, but my throat locked. My mind replayed every smile from the past few weeks, every gentle touch, every unexpected kindness. Now they all felt poisoned, rewritten by the ink of that debt. I sat frozen, the papers trembling in my hands, the weight of betrayal pressing down so hard I thought I might break beneath it. Around me, the silence stretched, thick and expectant. They were waiting, watching, measuring my reaction like actors holding their breath for the next line. And I knew whatever I said next would change everything. At first, I sat there in silence, staring at the papers in my hands, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The number 847,000 burned into my eyes. My son's voice filled the space between us, calm but urgent, wrapped in words meant to sound reasonable. He spoke of responsibility, of how families take care of one another, of how my win wasn't just for me, but for all of us. Each phrase landed like a stone, heavy with expectation. At first, it sounded like persuasion, but quickly it became something sharper. The smiles from earlier were gone, replaced with a quiet insistence that grew heavier with every breath. My daughter-in-law leaned into the performance, her face painted with practiced vulnerability, her tone soaked in gratitude and need. She didn't have to say it outright. I could feel the unspoken message pressing down on me if I truly loved them. I would do this. If I said no, then I was choosing money over family. The guilt seeped into the room like smoke, curling around me, tightening around my chest. They reminded me of sacrifices I had made in the past, of times when I had stepped in for smaller troubles. Now they framed this as just another step, another duty, but it wasn't. This wasn't asking, it was demanding, dressed in the fragile costume of love. The more they spoke, the more I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I was no longer the parent who had worked for decades, who had finally earned a sliver of peace. I was being cornered into the role of savior, the solution to years of mistakes that were never mine to carry. And underneath every word, I could feel the threat pulsing agree or risk losing them. For a moment, I wavered. The thought of estrangement clawed at me, the fear of being abandoned by my own blood. But then anger surged. My chest ached not just from their demand, but from the realization that love, real love, would never come with conditions written in dollar signs. I sat straighter, my hands steadying against the weight of the papers. They thought they had me trapped, but I could feel something inside me shifting, a line being drawn, quietly, firmly. The air between us thickened, waiting, bracing for what would come next. I drew a breath, steadying myself as their words swirled around me, thick with guilt and pressure. For a long moment, I let the silence hang. Then I finally said the only truth that mattered. I wasn't going to hand over my life's one stroke of luck to clean up a mess I didn't make. My voice came out calm, but inside, I was shaking, not from fear, but from the force of drawing a line I had never dared to draw before. The room stiffened. My son's eyes darted away, his face caught between anger and embarrassment, while his wife froze for just a second, like she hadn't expected me to push back. Then her mask cracked, her tone sharpened, her warmth gone. She began to pile on accusations selfish, ungrateful, cold. She spun the story so that I was the villain, the one tearing the family apart. Each word dug at me, clawing at the softest places in my heart, but I didn't bend. I sat taller, my hands folded in my lap, my jaw locked. I let her rage wash over me without giving ground. That seemed to enrage her even more. And then it happened. She lifted her glass with a flick of her wrist, and before I could move, the martini splashed across my face. The liquid was icy, burning my eyes and dripping down my chin. For an instant, I froze, stunned by the sheer humiliation. The shock, the sting, The shame, they all hit me at once, like being slapped in front of the world. But then something else rose inside me. In the cold trickle running down my neck, I felt fire ignite. The humiliation didn't break me, it hardened me. I wiped my face slowly with a napkin, my hand steady, my eyes never leaving hers. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that silence, I discovered my strength. I realized in that moment that their approval, their love, had always been conditional, and I was done paying the price for it. So I stood not with shouting or rage, but with quiet defiance. My dignity was intact, even as the alcohol soaked through my clothes. I walked out of that room taller than when I'd entered, carrying with me not shame, but resolve. They thought the martini would humiliate me into submission. Instead, it marked the exact moment I decided to fight back. The moment I closed the door behind me, the weight of what had just happened crashed down. My clothes were sticky, my face still stung, and the smell of alcohol clung to me like a scarlet mark. I remember standing in the bathroom, water running over my skin, watching the martini wash down the drain. It wasn't just a drink I was rinsing away, it was the humiliation, the betrayal, the years of hoping for a closeness that was never real. When I finally lifted my eyes to the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. There was pain. Yes, my cheeks were flushed from both the sting and the shame. But behind that, I saw something harder, sharper. A quiet resolve had taken root. I realized I couldn't undo the past, but I could take control of what came next. That night, lying awake, I mapped it out in my mind. I wasn't going to fight with screaming matches or more humiliation. I was going to fight with clarity, with protection, with the law. Within days, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. I laid everything out: the lottery win, the sudden family duty request, the debt they tried to push onto me. We discussed trusts, protections, and legal safeguards that would lock my money away where no guilt trip or tantrum could reach it. I went to the bank, updated my accounts, and put barriers in place that only I controlled. Each step steadied me. With every form I signed and every safeguard I put up, the fog of humiliation cleared, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: power over my own life. It wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, about making sure I'd never again be cornered or shamed into carrying someone else's burden. By the time I left the lawyer's office, my head was high. They had tried to break me with manipulation and humiliation. Instead, they forged a stronger version of me. And as I walked out into the sunlight that day, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a counterattack they would never see coming. They came at me again, as if nothing had changed. Their smiles were thinner now, but the script was the same: family duty, shared responsibility, the suggestion that I owed them something. I sat there in silence for a moment, letting their words hang in the air, and then I felt the calmest strength rise inside me. This time, I wasn't cornered. I was prepared. I told them, gently but firmly, that the money wasn't mine to hand out anymore. I had placed it in a trust, secured by a lawyer, structured so that no signature, no plea, no performance could pry it open. I watched their faces as the words sank in. At first, there was disbelief, then irritation, and finally something rawer: panic. My son leaned forward, trying to regain ground, but each explanation I gave unraveled their confidence further. The trust was airtight. The winnings were safeguarded for my future. for my peace. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was a legal wall they couldn't scale. What surprised me most was not their outrage, but the silence that followed. For once, they had nothing rehearsed to say. Their charm, their guilt-tripping, their threats, it all crumbled when faced with a truth they couldn't twist. I sat straighter than I had in weeks. The humiliation of that martini, the sting of betrayal, the ache of being manipulated, it all seemed to dissolve in that moment. What was left was something clean and steady dignity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The law was my shield, and my calm was my sword. Watching them unravel, watching the confidence drain from their eyes, was the justice I hadn't known I was craving. For the first time since the lottery win, I felt free not because I had money, but because I had taken back control. Their power over me was gone, and in its place stood the quiet, undeniable truth they had no claim, no leverage, no hold. And as I left that room, their stunned silence trailing behind me, I knew this battle wasn't just about money. It was about truth, and that final reckoning was still to come. They tried one last time to pull me back in. Their words shifted, swinging between sweetened guilt and sharp blame, as if they could still twist me into believing that I owed them my life. I sat there, listening, but something inside me had already changed. Their voices no longer carried the same power. What I felt wasn't fear, it was clarity. For so many years, I had carried the weight of sacrifice in silence. I worked late nights as a teacher, clipping coupons, skipping small luxuries so my family could have what they needed. I patched shoes, stretched meals, and put my own dreams on the shelf. I thought love would be enough, that all the quiet giving would one day be returned with respect. But as I looked at them now, desperate, entitled, unwilling to see me as anything but a wallet to plunder, I realized that truth was the only thing left I had to give. And so, I let it out. I spoke about the neglect, the birthdays forgotten, the calls that never came, the years I was invisible unless they needed something. I spoke about the sting of being treated as less than, even by my own blood, until money changed the way they looked at me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Each word was steady, sharp, undeniable, and with every truth I laid bare, I could see their performance unravel. The masks of kindness slipped. What remained was naked entitlement and the silence of people caught in the light of honesty. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for love or respect. I wasn't apologizing for wanting peace. I was reclaiming it. And when I finished, when the last word left my lips, the room fell silent. Not the silence of agreement, not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes when lies can no longer breathe. I stood in that silence, not broken, but whole, and knew I would never again carry the weight of their expectations. The truth had set me free. When the dust finally settled, the loudest thing in my life was silence. Not the heavy silence of tension, but the kind that feels like fresh air after a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing myself for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next sting of being used. What I felt instead was relief, pure, steady relief. I thought I would be left hollow after walking away. But the truth is, I felt lighter. I had lost the illusion of family closeness, but I had gained something far more valuable: peace of mind. I could look in the mirror and see someone who stood firm, who refused to be broken by manipulation. That was worth more than any approval I might have begged for in the past. The winnings no longer felt like a curse chained to other people's expectations. They were mine tools for building a life I had long dreamed of. I could finally think about travel, about comfort, about small joys I had always postponed. But more than that, I had the freedom to live without strings attached, to use what I had not just for survival, but for fulfillment. What I learned was simple, but it took me a lifetime to understand. Love without respect is just control, and family without trust is just theater. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are doors that protect peace and dignity. As I move forward, I carry no bitterness, only clarity. Resilience gave me back my life, and self-respect gave me the strength to live it on my own terms. And maybe that's the real victory. Not the money, not even the justice, but the freedom to finally choose myself. If you've ever felt the weight of betrayal or the sting of being taken for granted, I hope my story reminds you of this. You are worth protecting. Stand firm. And if this resonated with you, share it because someone else out there might need to hear it today. Looking back, the biggest lesson I carry isn't about money or family drama. It's about knowing your worth and having the courage to protect it. Self-respect isn't negotiable, and independence doesn't mean being alone. It means choosing to step away from manipulation and claim your life on your own terms. We all face moments where loyalty and love are tested, where people we trust try to take advantage of us. What I learned is that standing firm isn't selfish, it's necessary. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the space where dignity and peace can grow. And once you honor yourself, everything else starts to fall into place. I share this story because I hope it reminds you to trust your instincts, honor your limits, and embrace your own power. Your worth isn't defined by the approval of others, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what doesn't serve you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect, what boundaries do you need to set in your own life? And if you found value in this journey, please like, share, or comment. By engaging, you're helping to spread the reminder that we all deserve respect, dignity, and the freedom to live our lives fully.